Hello Internet, welcome to the channel. My name's Frankie and in today's video we are going back to Primate Isles and we are building for the second of the great apes, and that is the Western Chimpanzee. What you can see me doing now is just sketching out the general area that I want for this habitat. This is easily going to be one of the largest habitats I've ever done on the channel, rivaling the wolf habitat from Floki Wildlife Park. I didn't actually intend for it to be that big, it just sort of happened. But yeah, I'm not complaining, I think it does look pretty cool. I'm basing this ever so loosely, and I really do mean ever so loosely, on a zoo from, which is it? It's North Carolina. Yeah, North Carolina Zoo. They have a lovely looking chimp enclosure, at least from what I've seen online and the research I've been able to do, and I am trying to let that influence what I'm doing here. So what you can see me sketching out at the moment is a education centre, somewhere that we can have our guests come and learn about the animals whilst having a bit of shelter and being able to see them from the indoors. We'll have a couple animal talks and stuff there as well, and then outside we're going to have a slightly more open viewing gallery that's going to be made out of glass and concrete, which is what I'm going to be doing now. I'm using the grid method when placing the path to make sure that we can create quite a nice plaza-y sort of shape, have one big mass rather than individual paths, something that people can traverse pretty freely. And how I am making this viewing gallery is going to be using some of the Twilight masonry blocks because I really like some of the pieces from that pack. We're going to stack them on top of each other to make these huge concrete pillars, and then once we're happy with the height of them, we're going to use some various bits of timber to join them to make sure they're not just massive bits of concrete, because if they fall over they're going to kill people. We don't want that, we want to brace them somehow, so we're going to use some wood to join them all together, and then when we want to add the glass, instead of manually adding our own sheets of glass, what I'll do is I will use a glass barrier and sink the posts inside of these concrete pillars, therefore hiding them and making it look as if though they were just clean sheets of glass in between each one, which will create a lovely viewing gallery for our guests. As for what type of wood we're going to be using to brace in between these bits of concrete, we are using the East Asian unpainted timber. These are some of my most favourite pieces of wood in the game. I really like that rustic look that they have, and the only downside to them is that they do bend and they're not entirely like 100% straight, which does lend itself to that organic texture that I want. However, if you need to extend them or anything by copy and pasting them, they can kind of clip in and out of each other in a weird way, and whilst I could spend ages trying to get it just right, I'm not going to bother because I'm never going to notice this when I'm actually playing the game. It's just right now that I can see that it's a problem. That's a little tip for all of you out there. If you are wanting to improve on your building skills, one of the best things that I can say to you is care slightly less. I think we are all so concerned with being perfect that it sucks the joy out of it a little bit. If you just allow for little imperfections like that, things you're never going to see once you move on from this area, then does it really matter? No, of course it doesn't. Just enjoy yourself and play the game for you rather than how other people are going to be perceiving this build. Something else that I tried with this viewing gallery was to create a kind of central bench where people could sit down and view the animals that isn't just standalone benches, something that looks a bit nicer. So what I did was I created a, I'm not sure if a hexagon, no, it's an octagon of benches. Basically, I laid out benches in a octagonal way, and then using some building pieces, the horizontal wooden planks, I just laid them over the top of it. Try to hide these entirely and just mask them as much as I can. That way, if somebody wants to use this bench, they will actually sit, well, it will look like they are sitting on the wood rather than the bench underneath it. There might be a little bit of a clipping, they might sink through it ever so slightly, but mostly it's going to work. This ends up not being entirely in the middle, which is completely fine, because all I actually need to do is then move the wooden structure that I'm creating and place some benches underneath it accordingly. I also go and leave a small area in the middle that I can then put a small patch of mulch in, and then whack a tree right in there as well, as if though a tree was standing here before they even built this habitat, and in order to preserve it they have built this bench kind of seating area around it. Just a nice little fun way of adding a bit of interest to this viewing gallery rather than having it be just a large open space. Now over to our education area, and the building itself isn't going to be anything fancy. It's basically just going to be a large rectangle with a sloped area inside for guests to go out and round to the other viewing gallery, and there's going to be some indoor seating for an animal talk, and we're even going to add a coffee area in here as well, with a couple tables here and there. The front of the building is going to be primarily glass to act as a viewing gallery as well, because we don't want it to just be talking about the animals and not being able to see them. That seems a little bit counterproductive. It was quite finicky to build this just because I had set out the pathing and had the path be 5 meters wide, which kind of offset the 4 meter rule for the building pieces. That was kind of annoying. So there was a lot of back and forth when actually building this. That's just an oversight on my part. I think I'll try and change that in the future. Make sure that when I am laying down a path before the building, make sure that it is 4 meters wide so that it will work with all the building pieces later. The main material that I'm using for this building is the vertical wooden plank wall pieces from the New World theme. This is available in base game. You don't need any of the DLCs, so go wild and try to replicate this if you want. As for the roof, I do believe that that is the wooden plank roof from the aquatic pack. I think the viewing gallery at the front is really simple, just using some thinner pieces of wood to create some kind of pillars in between large planes of glass will allow us to have really big windows at the front of this viewing gallery. In terms of decoration, there isn't too much going on. I didn't want it to be super crazy, so I create a really I create a really small kind of mural thing on the back wall near the coffee area, and I do that by using some of the art shapes, a couple trees and the chimp shape as well, just to create a tiny little scene back there. I'm also using some metallic looking chimp sculptures that I believe are part of the Africa theme, not the Africa pack, just the Africa theme that you get in base game as well. We're also going to be using some conservation boards. We're going to have a few of those dotted about just to make sure that we're boosting the education score for this zoo, because so far I don't imagine it is that high, because basically the only education people have been getting is from the education boards for each species, which are great, but we want to boost that score as much as possible. In the corner we're also going to pop a large rock, and then we're going to put some of the chimp statues on there. They are the reward statues, because I really like using these statues where I can, because they are really similar to the actual animals you got in the zoo. So it's a really good way of representing them. So yeah, whenever I get the chance to, I will use those to decorate the outside of a habitat. I also popped a round circular window above the door, and that is just a reference for me for Rise of the Planet of the Apes. When, if you've seen that franchise of films, the most recent Planet of the Apes trilogy, there was a house in which Caesar was brought up in the very first film, and he lived in the attic and looked out of this circular window, and it's kind of iconic for that reason. In terms of within the franchise, it's iconic. So I decided that I would try and incorporate something similar to that as we are building for the chimpanzees. It just felt kind of right for me, as I'm such a big fan of that franchise. Something else that I decided to do for this build, because of where I placed the coffee stand, you have to delete some path and it just looks a bit weird. There's some grass poking up through the floor and suddenly it doesn't work having all this wood on the floor. It just doesn't work the way I want it to. So instead I'm going to use some flooring pieces, the purple slats. I think they are just called painted wooden planks or something, and they are from the aquatic pack. That's almost definite that they're from that pack. Yeah, I use those and then sink them as low as I possibly can towards the surface of the floor, so that it covers what we have down as our path, but our guests can still walk on top of it. And if they are clipping into it, it's going to be the tiniest bit. We're just disguising this crappy looking flooring that we've got at the moment. And I also decided to play about with the coffee stand a little bit. Ordinarily I would just whack one of the shops in here, but it just didn't fit quite right. So what I did was I used literally just the counter, which you can get from the same tab as the rest of your shops, and then using the Twilight planks, because they are my favourite pieces of wood, I'm going to mask this bright red plasticky looking counter, make it look more like it is actually made of wood, and wood exists, that was an accidental pun, but wood exists within this building. I can then join it to the wall, create my own legs for this counter as well, and then decorate it accordingly. And all I'm going to do is pop a few different open sacks down there, because they kind of look like sacks of coffee beans, which I think works pretty well, and maybe an empty fruit box or something. But yeah, if you want to have a more custom approach to your shops and stuff, I would suggest using these counters and then masking them how you want them to look. I think it does make for a much more individual looking build. It's a really easy way to put your own personal stamp on shops. Now, I would just like to take a moment to say, if you are still watching this video and you're not subscribed to the channel already, please consider doing so. We are trying to reach 1,000 subscribers on the channel by the end of the year, and we are getting there, but you know, it's always worth giving that little push and asking people to join. And what do you get for joining? Well, you get more videos exactly like this appearing in your subscription feed, and it's absolutely free. Join us for the journey of building Primate Isles, and hopefully next month I'm going to be building my first mini zoo, which will be a limited series. It's literally just going to run for the month of October, and I'm going to try and create a really small Halloween themed zoo. So drop any suggestions that you have for builds on the channel and stuff in the comments down below, and make sure you're subscribed to the channel so that you don't miss out on anything in the future. Now, as for the barrier for this habitat, I did consider doing a custom barrier, but what I ended up doing was just going for the basic chain link fence. And the reason for this is because I know for a fact that I want to mostly mask the fencing with loads of plant life. This habitat is going to be as close to a jungle as I can possibly get for these animals. There will be open spaces on the ground for them to run about and stuff, but I do really want to pack this foliage in pretty densely. So with that in mind, we're going to not put too much effort into the barrier, because it's going to be largely invisible due to all the bushes and trees that are packed right up against it. Now, the theme for this habitat is kind of to have an oasis. We're going to have a large open body of water in the middle of the habitat, surrounded by really dense foliage, as if though it is kind of giving birth to all of the plant life around it. It is the main source of sustenance for these plants and stuff, so we're really going to have a focal point on this water source. It's going to be a really large open area, and then we're going to use a lot of rocky outcrops around it and sunk into the kind of shoreline that this thing creates, and we're just going to make it look a lot more dynamic and interesting by having a bunch of rocks and stuff in place as well. As I've said on the channel many times before, the best way to make something look natural is variation. And variation is key when you want stuff to look natural. You want things to look as random as possible, because that's the way the nature is. Things just happen all the time. There's always a reason, yes, but it's not as uniform as we may want it. So that is how I approach doing my rocky outcrops. Normally I start with large ones to mark out where I want the main outcrops to be, but then we're going to be using a variety of shapes and sizes dotted around them to make them look a lot more natural. That is how I would suggest that anybody approaches doing rock work in their own habitats, because I like them looking natural. I know a lot of people don't. They like that man-made feel to them, they like the concrete and whatnot, but I like it to look as if though we have literally just put a fence around this piece of African jungle and let our chimps run wild as a bit of a sanctuary for them. Now, before we place any plants and really pack this out to make it look like a jungle, what I'm going to do is I'm going to place our enrichment items. I do place a couple of trees to begin with, because I really like the idea of having a large dead tree right in the centre of the habitat, like this one from the Twilight pack, just looking gnarled and dead and rotten. Something for the animals to kind of have a central point in their habitat, if you know what I mean. I'm going to place the feeders right in front of both viewing galleries so that when animals do go to feed, the guests are going to be getting the best view possible. And I'm going to try my hand at creating a climbing frame. Now, the climbing frame I'm going to be creating basically going to be a series of really long logs sticking out of the ground up into the air, connected by ropes, and this is primarily influenced by the orangutan enclosure at Chester Zoo. They use disused fire hoses, I believe, to connect their long logs and pieces of wood and stuff, and the animals absolutely love it. They love to climb between the things, so I thought I would try and recreate that using wood and rope in this instead. And I've got to say, I really like how it turns out, and even better than that, the animals actually can use it. That was something I wasn't entirely sure would work. I wasn't sure if the animals would climb on it and stuff whilst I was building it. But once I had finished building the habitat and I got to just watch these animals enjoy, they were actually using that custom climbing frame. So I'm very happy with how that turns out. As for the plant life, like I said, I want this to be a nice, rich looking jungle, densely packed with foliage and life. So I'm just going to go wild placing plants and stuff, and we're going to pop it in time lapse for now, let you guys enjoy, and I will be back. This isn't going to be the last time you hear my voice, because we've also got a kind of backstagey sleeping area to make. It's not going to be anything too fancy, but we do need to make sure these animals have somewhere to rest, so do stick around and I'll be back very soon. So moving on to the off-show backstage area where these animals get to sleep, it's actually going to be really quite basic. I'm going to make something kind of just out of concrete and blocks. The lower layer is going to be made out of concrete, and then we're going to use some limestone above it. When I say concrete, I do mean concrete blocks, just to make it a bit more interesting, because if it is just a flat concrete on the outside, it's going to look really dull. But using these varying types of building pieces just adds a little bit more interest to it, breaks it up a little bit more. Not that this building does have to be anything fancy, it just does help to make it look a little bit nicer. As for what goes on internally, we are just going to be using the 4-meter wide chain link fences, and we're going to use those to divide up this building and make sure that there are a few different areas for our animals to go and sleep. In this case it's going to be 3. We're going to create 3 sections with a fence that runs along about a third of the way into the building to allow our staff to walk up the back, and at the back of that path we will also have a shelving area and whatnot where we will have our zookeepers keeping food and enrichment items for our animals. I'm not going to go super crazy with lighting in here, and that is because this zoo does close earlier in the evening, meaning it's never going to get really dark here, so I'm not going to bother with the lighting. I am probably going to bother when I do this Halloween zoo that I'm thinking of doing, because I want it to be spooky and I want it to be set at night time. So I'm kind of looking forward to that challenge of pushing myself to understand the lighting in this game a little bit better and how to place lights to make certain effects and stuff. It's a challenge I have not experimented with, and I'm kind of looking forward to doing so. And whilst I'm not going to bother too much with decorations on the wall either, such as posters or anything, I am going to add a couple windows just so that the walls aren't so flat, because that back wall at the moment is just one long piece of limestone and it looks horrible. It just looks so plain. So all I'm going to do is take some of the window pieces from, I think it's a New World window, and just sink it in on either side, make sure they're in line with each other, and then duplicate it a few times across the building. We're going to go with 3, one either end and then one in the middle. That just really helps to break up what is otherwise a really plain back wall. It just is mind-numbingly dull. When creating the door, I did run into a problem, and that is that the concrete blocks just poked out a little bit too much on the right hand side. So what I did in order to kind of mask this is run those blocks all the way along the edge of the building, creating a flower bed that I can then sink some mulch into, and if I want to, add some plants to. It just makes it kind of look a bit more interesting, which wasn't the intention, but it also just allows me to put some concrete blocks in that bottom right corner to make sure that the whole building's uniform, because otherwise it wouldn't have worked and it just would have looked a bit crap. Here we are using some of the what are they called? They are shelves. Yeah, completely forgot the word shelf. We're using some of the shelf pieces that I built when I was building our llama habitat for this zoo. Not llama, lemur. Wow, okay, I've been talking for too long. My brain is just failing me entirely. I'm filling these shelves with various bits of fruit and enrichment items, making sure that it looks like this is an area that our keepers are going to be visiting in order to make sure that our animals have a lovely, fulfilled life with lots of enrichment items and food, making sure they're having a bunch of fun in their lovely habitat that we built for them. And once we have finished stacking these shelves full of wonderful things for animals, it's time to just create a really simple roof, and it really is nothing fancy. It's just some wooden slats, basically. Nothing fancy whatsoever. We're also going to be using some decals on the floor and stuff to show some wear and tear of the part of this building that is going to be used the most. And with that, this habitat is complete. Thank you so much for having watched this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up. Leave some suggestions down in the comments of what you'd like to see in the future on the channel. And make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss anything in the current series of this Planet Zoo Primate Isles. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.